Metal Sonic, everyone's favorite doppelganging Eggman robo. Sometimes he's a ruthless, evil mastermind behind schemes more elaborate than even Eggman's, and other times he's just a glorified badnik. Today, we're gonna look at Metal Sonic's character in every Sonic game he appears in, and rank him from worthless to elite. Metal Sonic's debut is right alongside Amy's. Sonic's running through collision chaos, Amy makes the mistake of following him, and Metal shows up out of nowhere and yoinks her. The player, Sonic, can't do a thing to stop this from happening, and watches Metal charge right through a row of spikes that would normally kill him, which makes him seem so weak in comparison, and really sets a standard for his character. After that, he's seen in hologram form a couple times beating the shit out of animals, but isn't actually encountered again until Stardust Speedway for his iconic boss fight. Instead of the traditional stationary Sonic boss where you sit in a small arena and hit the enemy a couple times, Metal Sonic challenges into a battle of speed, Sonic's strongest attribute. He was created by Eggman to be better than Sonic at being Sonic, and this fight perfectly illustrates that, and sets up the superiority complex that would define Metal's character. But then he dies, and Sonic saves Amy. He wasn't around as much as I would have liked, especially in a game that advertises his inclusion so heavily, but when he is seen, he's incredibly powerful, and his fight was awesome, so it's gotta go up in Elite. And to clarify, the robot Sonic lookalike in Sonic 2 is actually Silver Mecha Sonic, and the one in Sonic 3 is just called Mecha Sonic. Kinda confusing, I know, but those don't count. Oh yeah, can't forget about the Game Gear staple that is Sonic Triple Trouble. He shows up toward the end of the game as a one-and-done boss and is simply one of Eggman's henchmen, so barely does anything. This game's surprisingly one of Metal Sonic's most prominent roles to this day. Eggman scoops up his remains from Little Planet and reworks his components into a new shell, which looks basically the exact same, but adds a new move called the Plasma Pulse Attack, so he's more capable than ever. He's not the one pulling the strings in this game, that's still Robotnik, but he does serve as the final boss for his very first time. He actually appears for two fights, the final one and the one right before it, which is a pretty unique fight, in that you don't attack him directly. Instead, he camps out under the stage and you have to up his machine. After that, he's pretty fried, so Eggman powers him to all new heights with this new dark ring he found, and it turns regular old Metal Sonic into Metal Sonic Kai, this badass, menacing behemoth of a robot. This boss is more terrifying than anything that came before it. Oh, besides that, if you beat him having collected all 6 Chaos Rings, you get this cool message, but if you didn't get all of them, you get the good ending, for Metal Sonic. He's seen hovering over the decimated remains of a city, and Eggman's laughing away. Now, any game where there's multiple endings and the bad guy wins in some of them is a big boost to their rating, so this one's another pretty self-explanatory Elite. He's a playable character from the start, and has the highest speed and acceleration stats in the game, but terrible handling, which averages out to a playable but average tier. In Sonic's weird 3D fighting game, Metal Sonic's the penultimate boss of the game, and is sure as hell the most challenging. There's not much of a story, but Eggman's definitely the main bad guy. Metal Sonic's basically his last line of defense, and after both of them get defeated, the Death Egg blows up and we see that both of them were able to get out unscathed. So pretty uneventful, but being the strongest opponent in the game, and a hidden playable character in the Versus mode is a solid case for at least a worthy opponent tier. In Sonic's crappy 3D racing game, Metal Sonic's the first unlockable character. Just snag the token in the first stage, get first place, and beat him in a one-on-one race. After that, he's a playable character that's slightly faster than base Sonic at the cost of handling, but he also loses the second jump that Sonic has and gains the ability to hover on water for a short time. A pretty average playable character and nothing more. In the original Sonic adventure, we only see Metal Sonic through the flashback Amy has at the beginning of her story, where she recalls the events of Sonic CD, and since that doesn't do jack for this story, he's going down in worthless. But in the DX port of the game, you can actually play as Metal Sonic for the first time in a mainline game, but only after collecting all 130 emblems. Yeah, it's a pain in the ass, and by the time that's done, there's nothing for him to contribute to. He plays the exact same as Sonic with some nice new animations, and that's it. So I'll bump him out of worthless, but he barely does anything, and that's being nice. He's not involved in the story whatsoever, but in the multiplayer mode, he's a full-on playable character. He's a carbon copy of Shadow in the base adventure too, but in the battle version, he's given special abilities and a slightly higher speed stat. I would put him in playable but average, but he's not playable in the main part of the game, and is just a bonus character in the shoehorned-in multiplayer mode, so it's another barely does anything. Eggman's the primary antagonist in the game, and Metal Sonic only enters the Egg Cup tournament to stop Sonic from winning. The two make it to the final round, Metal puts up a good fight, but in the end, Sonic is victorious, and Eggman steals the show by challenging Sonic to one final match after it all. So yeah, he's not even the final boss. Still, he worked his way into the final round just like Sonic did, and that takes a pretty worthy opponent. This game's easily Metal Sonic's best portrayal of all time. He's not playable, but the 4 teams that are all go on their own separate adventures, encounter Eggman at some point, and kick his ass. But the Eggmen turn out to be decoys that Metal Sonic was taking the form of all along. He apparently backstabbed Eggman at some point, locked him away in a mysterious room that the Chaotix eventually find, and took over his entire armada of ships and robots. He then uses the Eggman guys to fight each team, learn all their strengths and weaknesses, and figure out the optimal way to decimate all of them. It all culminates for the last story mode, where he morphs into a more intimidating form than even the one from Knuckles' Chaotix, Metal Madness. This thing has even Eggman shitting bricks.
It's useless!
The same Eggman that dove headfirst into perfect chaos. Yeah, this thing's the strongest foe to date. It took the power of all 12 playable characters and the 7 Chaos Emeralds to take this guy down. Dude is a f***ing menace. And just when you think you have him beat, he evolves again into Metal Overlord, once again topping his previous scariest look. Throughout this final phase, all the stuff he's saying really builds him up to be more than just an egotistical villain like Eggman or a mindless giant f***ing monster. He was created with a purpose, and that purpose was to destroy Sonic, which he'll go to any length to accomplish. He still loses, cause he's the bad guy, but this is the first time he's really taken control of the situation, and acted as the true brains of the operation. I mean, elite. He takes a step back in his next appearance, but is still seen a good bit throughout the story. He's a recurring rival you have to face against, just like in Stardust Speedway, only now the gameplay's terrible, but he's still a pretty admirable adversary to Sonic. He's also the final unlockable character, which is sick, and while he's just average to play as, being such an overused rival leads me to believe he's a worthy opponent. Metal Sonic's playable right from the start in Rivals 2, and he has his very own shared story mode with Shadow, which sounds awesome, but in it, he's a mindless servant for Eggman. He doesn't speak for himself at all. Instead, Eggman's talking through him and commanding him to do whatever he wants. You can obviously play as him throughout the story, but he's just a puppet for Eggman, so I can't put him quite as high. Now, after the day is saved, him and Shadow get trapped in the alternate dimension and only get out because Metal Sonic was carrying a Chaos Emerald and Shadow used it to warp him back to safety. Pretty freaking clutch of him, but it still doesn't save this appearance. He's a standard playable character that does the biddings of another character, so playable but average. He's not in the first Mario and Sonic Olympic games, surprisingly, but after the 2010 Winter Olympics, he doesn't look back. Now, game to game, his specifics vary a little, and the handheld ones have more expansive story modes that offer a bit more, but I don't think any of them do enough to warrant a ranking different than playable but average. I'm grouping Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing with the Transform version because they feature the same amount of Metal Sonic. He's not included in the base roster for some reason, but via DLC, you can finally play as him, and he's got a high top speed, decent maneuverability, and terrible acceleration. Solid trade-offs and another solid playable inclusion. Sonic Freeriders doesn't feature much Metal Sonic. It's usual Eggman hijinks for most of the game. He disguises himself as King Doc to host a Grand Prix where he scams everyone and collects their data. So to protect your data from Eggman's schemes, you've got to secure your information with today's video sponsor, NordVPN. Take it from a guy whose entire livelihood is online. Cybersecurity is critical, and it's not a concern until all of a sudden it is. Using public networks willy-nilly and just traversing the web puts you at major risk, and you gotta protect yourself. Sign up using my link below to prevent any Robotnik types from taking advantage of your precious data. Oh, but I guess it wasn't even Eggman collecting the data. The robot that was a part of Team Dark reveals itself to be Metal Sonic, who took it all for himself, and still can't beat Sonic. Well, shit. But hey, it gives off Sonic Heroes vibes because Metal betrays Eggman and is the true final boss, but it doesn't quite feel the same. There is the added bonus of him being playable though, so I think that's enough to push him to a very, very light elite. He's not in the first episode of Sonic 4, but the second has him playing a pretty prominent role beside Eggman. You fight him by himself twice, once in a racing-style level, and again in a Sky Chase ripoff. Then at the end of the game, he and Eggman challenge Sonic in the brand new Death Egg. It's an above-average role, but that's not even mentioning Episode Metal, which is entirely focused on filling the gap between the end of Sonic CD and the start of Sonic 4 Episode 2. He's the main and only playable character in this mode, and it's the first time he's ever been given that treatment. It's also super cool to see a proper backstory on what happened after his destruction, and it ties this game back to Sonic CD beautifully. It's gotta go elite. He gets a full-on recreation of his classic fight in Sonic Generations, and while he doesn't have much importance to the story, he's holding one of the Chaos Emeralds, and the Sonics need all 7 to defeat the Time Eater in the end, so he's technically vital. He is a very worthy opponent to Classic Sonic for a couple of minutes, then isn't seen again. This seems too high, but no other tier really fits it better. He's not around for very long in this game, but after the alliance between Lyric and Eggman goes awry, Eggman flexes Metal Sonic as his latest creation that's gonna kick Lyric's ass. But then he presses some magic button that makes Metal Sonic take orders from him, and Eggman's royally cooked. Lyric sends Metal after some crystal that Sonic and Co were looking for, they duke it out against him, and he feels like a really freaking powerful foe. It's a 1v4, and Metal outruns all of them to send all kinds of attacks their way. It's a really quality boss fight. If he wasn't a mindless slave, I'd be tempted to put him up in a lead, but worthy opponent is pretty fair. After Sonic destroys a familiar-looking hologram of Metal Sonic stomping on some animals, the real Metal appears and wreaks some havoc. He chases him around like Stardust Speedway, then stops at this machine that lets him generate little Mecha Sonics to help him out. That gets ruined, more running, they bump into Eggman, and he gives Metal the Phantom Ruby, which turns him into Giga Metal, an all-new giant f***ing Metal Sonic form. This one looks sick like usual and is a really solid boss fight, but it's beaten and he's gone forever. A worthy opponent, and that's it. I hate Sonic Forces, and another reason why is because they tease us with all these returning villains, only to find out they're holograms made by this douche. That includes Metal Sonic, and although he's fought as a boss, it's fucking Infinite, not Metal Sonic, so he's worthless. He's a lot less prominent than he was in the previous Sonic racing game. There's a full-on story mode here, but Metal's not a very important character, and he races in Team Eggman, who continually loses to the heroes, so not a good look. He's playable, but below average. I don't have that tier, so... He's not in the original Sonic colors, but in the atrocious remaster, each area has this rival rush challenge where you have to beat Metal Sonic to the end of a stage. Cool concept, and it makes a ton of sense given his relation to Sonic. But he's only a ghost, so it's basically just time attack. It would have been so cool if it brought back features from Adventure 2's battle mode, where you could attack each other and actually interact, but this is just stupid. Worthless. He doesn't say a word in this game, but he's seen toward the end chilling with Eggman wearing a Let's Go Dad shirt, which I thought was funny, but it's still a worthless. Nothing changes for him in the Sonic Generations side, but in the Shadow Generations mode, we take on Metal Overlord as a boss fight, and oh my god does it rock. It's such a visually stunning level, there's so much going on, the cinematography is immaculate, and it's a fresh take on this boss. One of my favorite fights in the entire series, and the only downside is the same thing I said about the Metal fight in Sonic Generations. He has little to no plot importance, but this much spectacle has to be rewarded, so I'm giving it Worthy Opponent Plus. And there you have it.